The movie opens with a shot of Philadelphia in 2024 where we see an empty office building and a devastated city filled with fire and piercing screams. The scene then moves backward in time to 1988 where we catch a glimpse into the lives of three different people: a concert pianist, a bus driver, and a chef working in a diner. They are all busy with their usual routines when all of a sudden blood gushes from every opening on their faces. All three collapse dead within seconds, and at the same time, we see a mysterious figure in a blue hoodie wandering through the city. Not far away, a police officer named Thomas wakes up and prepares a meal while his pregnant wife is sleeping. On the news, he hears how a bus driver lost control of a vehicle and slammed into several oncoming cars, unleashing chaos. Thomas then gives his wife the food and tells her goodbye before rushing out for his graveyard shift. Sometime later, Thomas meets up with his partner Maddox and they arrive at the scene where the bus driver collapsed and caused the accident. The lead detective is an officer named Holt who turns out to be Thomas's brother-in-law. Thomas checks the deceased bus driver and is horrified to see blood gushing from her face. Her brain is essentially melted, with the cause of death identified as hemorrhaging. He also notices three marks on her neck, which he believes are puncture wounds. Holt dismisses it as a birthmark, but soon they are notified that two others died in the same way just moments earlier, and both also bore three similar marks on the back of their necks. Next, the officers go to examine the bodies of the pianist and the chef, who also appear to have died from hemorrhaging. Thomas offers his insights on the case, but Hall tells him to stay out of it, as he believes this case could be a potential big break for his promotion. Sometime later, Thomas and Maddox arrive at the hospital, where they meet the doctor who performed the autopsies and asks if he found anything crucial. The doctor reveals that the marks on the necks are actually deep injections driven so far in that they likely reached the vertebrae. The substance injected is identified as an unstable isotope, but the bizarre thing is that the forensics team cannot determine its exact composition. Later, Thomas and Maddox go to grab some food when they receive a call that a woman nearby has been attacked on the neck with a blunt force. It turns out she also has three marks on her neck, but she is still alive and not bleeding. The two officers seize the opportunity and quickly arrive at the nightclub where they meet the stripper who was attacked. Thomas questions her and she explains that she was hit on the neck with a metal tool by a black woman wearing a blue hoodie. She also reveals that the woman's left hand was injured and covered in dried blood. Just then, Holt arrives to interrupt their conversation and asks the girl to describe in detail what happened. She reluctantly repeats everything when all of a sudden the girl collapses dead. After this, the police go out and arrest several black women who match the description given by the last victim. However, we see that the real killer is still free as she is placing a strange device on the car. She runs away and disappears as soon as the cop arrives. Not long after, Thomas and Maddox are driving when they come face to face with the same woman, but she quickly flees, sparking an intense chase. The two detectives call for backup and Holt orders every officer in town to search for her. Meanwhile, Thomas's car nearly collides with a truck, forcing him and Maddox to continue their pursuit on foot. They realize the woman is somewhere near the subway, so they plan to corner her and split up. While looking for the woman, Thomas stumbles across a strange device and decides to keep it. Later, in the underground subway, Maddox finds the woman and demands that she surrender, but she manages to overpower him and breaks his leg before fleeing. Thomas hears the commotion, rushes to the scene, and begins chasing the killer woman. He eventually corners her and orders her to put her hands up and turn around. Then, in a shocking twist, she calls Thomas by name and congratulates him on his daughter. She also says she's sorry about his partner, but the confused officer doesn't understand what she's talking about. Thomas then tries to arrest her, but the woman easily overpowers him and handcuffs him to a bench, saying that she'll see him again. As she turns to leave, Thomas attacks her with the same strange device she used to inject her victims, causing her to lose her balance. She tragically falls in front of an oncoming train and dies. This incident leaves Thomas horrified, but before he can collect himself, he receives news that his wife is in the hospital. He rushes there and is approached by an investigator who reveals they couldn't trace any ID or fingerprints for the suspect woman. They found a key with her, but they have no idea what it's for. Even more bizarre is that a bullet was found lodged in her wrist and it matches Thomas's revolver, although he never fired the shot. Suddenly, a nurse interrupts their conversation and informs Thomas that his wife is suffering severe complications and hemorrhaging. He rushes to her side and tries to comfort her through the excruciating labor pains, but she soon begins to lose consciousness, and the doctors rush frantically to save her. Sometime later, a nurse places a healthy baby into Thomas's arms, but the joy is instantly shattered when he learns that his wife couldn't make it. The scene then cuts to 1997, where we see Thomas's daughter, Amy, who is now 9 years old. She is making breakfast while the TV reports that protesters are in streets demanding answers about the incident from 9 years ago. Many sympathize with the unidentified black woman and argue that she was unarmed, but instead of taking her in, the white officer threw her under the train. Later, Thomas, who is now a detective, wishes his daughter a happy birthday and gives her a bracelet as a gift. The two then visit Thomas's wife's grave, where he notices a snail on the tombstone and fresh flowers, leaving him puzzled. Soon after, he receives a call from the police and is shocked to learn that the killings, identical to those from 9 years ago, are happening again. Without wasting any time, Thomas rushes to the crime scene and meets Maddox, who now works with a limb because of the incident from 9 years earlier. Thomas asks him if he placed flowers on his wife's grave that morning, but Maddox denies it. The two then arrive at a university classroom where a professor lies dead, bearing the same three puncture marks on his neck with blood streaming from his face. Moments later, Holt, who is now a lieutenant, arrives and the officers check the security camera footage. Their eyes widen in shock as they see the perpetrator, who looks and is dressed exactly like the woman from 9 years ago. Since she is supposed to be dead, they assume it must be a deranged copycat killer. Back at the station, Thomas begins reviewing the case files from 9 years ago, hoping they might lead to a clue. He soon comes across the mysterious key that was found with the woman back then and assigns his team to investigate it. Meanwhile, more deaths continue to occur, pushing the police to the edge and sparking panic among the public. Later, Thomas examines the new suspect's left hand in the footage and notices it is injured, just like the woman from 9 years ago. He tells Maddox that they never made that detail public, making it impossible for a copycat to know about it. Just then, an officer informs that the key they investigated belongs to a plane that was only manufactured a year ago in 1996. The detectives are bewildered, and upon learning that there is only one airfield within 100 miles that has this model, they decide to head there. As Thomas and Maddox are leaving, they are approached by a psychiatrist physicist named Dr. Naveen Rao, who explains that this case is closely linked to his research. He says the appearance of the killer coincides with a natural phenomenon known as the supermoon or blood moon, which occurs precisely every 9 years. During this moment, due to gravitational forces and electromagnetic fields, a kind of bridge is created that connects to another place. However, the detectives dismiss his theory as nonsense and leave without giving it much thought. Sometime later, the detectives arrive at the airfield where Thomas heads inside alone and meets the manager. Thomas shows him a picture of the woman, asking if he's ever seen her, but the man says he hasn't. However, he appears nervous, and we surprisingly see that the woman is also nearby, hiding behind a wall. Thomas senses the manager's fear, so he communicates with him by writing on a piece of paper and learns that someone else is there. As Thomas reaches for his gun, the woman suddenly holds him at gunpoint and says it's nice to see him again. She makes the manager tie Thomas to a chair, but during this, the detective secretly makes a call to his partner outside who hears everything. The woman then asks the manager for the keys to his plane, and he reluctantly hands them over. When he reaches for a hidden gun, she quickly overpowers him just as police sirens begin to approach. The woman panics and decides to take Thomas hostage. At that moment, Maddox enters the room and the woman instantly reacts and shoots him in the head. She immediately regrets it upon realizing it was Maddox. Thomas is devastated, but the woman forces him onto the plane as police surround the area. Lieutenant Holt realizes his brother in law is on board and orders the officers not to open fire. Later, the woman tells Thomas to stop chasing her and claims she is doing all of this for a good reason. She explains that every 9 years, when the moon sets, she can return, but only for a short time. When Thomas refuses to stop chasing her, she unties him and throws him off the plane, sending him crashing into the sea below. Thomas eventually makes it to the shore where he notices wreckage from the plane crash, but the woman is nowhere to be found. The next morning, Hoth and his team arrive and begin searching desperately for the killer. Thomas tells them not to bother, explaining that the woman is from the future, but Holt can only stare at him as if he's lost his mind. The movie then jumps forward 9 years to 2006, where an older Thomas is seen digging up the grave of a man named Harold Noah. He uncovers the skeleton and notices a puncture wound in the vertebrae of the neck. Thomas continues his investigation and learns from a newspaper clipping that Dr. Naveen has been missing for a long time. The next morning, Thomas meets Harold's widow and introduces himself as a private investigator, asking about her husband. She is surprised as her husband supposedly died 18 years ago, but allows him inside. She gives Thomas some of Harold's old files, revealing that he was the leader of a racial supremacy movement called the Real American Movement. Harold secretly spread his ideology by embedding hate messages into American history books and distributing them to a massive network. It is revealed that Harold and his ex wife Heather Russell worked together before eventually splitting up. The widow gives Thomas a mailing list of Harold's contacts in exchange for compensation. As Thomas studies the files, he realizes that all of the killer's victims are connected to Harold and political extremism. Later, Thomas picks up Amy from school on her 18th birthday. It's revealed that Thomas is no longer a police officer due to his obsession with the case and neglect of his daughter, who now lives with Holt's family. Thomas meets Holt and presents evidence about Harold Noah, showing that several victims were connected to the real American movement. He explains that the woman isn't resurrected, but rather traveling backward through time. Thomas insists that she will return today and asks Holt for help finding her, Heather Russell. Holt dismisses the theory and urges Thomas to rebuild his life for his daughter's sake. As Holt leaves, Thomas breaks down and apologizes, saying he wants help. Holt comforts him and promises support, but it's later revealed that Thomas only pretended to steal Holt's badge. Thomas calls the station while impersonating Holt and obtains Heather Russell's address. When he arrives, he finds a dead woman bleeding from her face like the other victims. Suddenly, Heather appears and Thomas manages to injure her left hand. She escapes on a motorcycle and Thomas hijacks a truck to chase her. The chase leads into a sewer where Thomas finds Heather inside a time travel machine. As the water floods the chamber, Thomas vows they will meet again before Heather disappears with the device. As Thomas emerges, he is arrested by the police and a furious Holt. Thomas explains that he shot Heather in the past, explaining the injuries and bullet in her hand. But Holt refuses to believe him. In the distance, Dr. Naveen watches everything unfold. The story jumps forward another 9 years to 2015, where Dr. Naveen is seen experimenting with an isotope device on pigs, causing them to bleed from the nose, eyes, and ears before dying instantly. Meanwhile, Thomas camps on the beach where the killer disappeared 9 years ago, waiting for her return. Thomas receives a voicemail from Amy, who's about to give birth and wants him there. Before he can act, Thomas is kidnapped by Naveen, who reveals that he supports the women's mission. Naveen explains that her killings are meant to prevent the much worse future and that she is a savior. Thomas escapes during a crash and races to the beach. The woman reappears from the sewer and approaches the beach only to find Thomas waiting with a gun. She reveals her name is Raya and shocks him by saying that Thomas himself recruited her for this mission. She shows him a bracelet identical to the one Thomas gave Amy, revealing she is his granddaughter. Raya explains that time travel only works in one direction and that her mission always ends with her death. She asks Thomas to go home and take care of Amy. Thomas collapses in tears as she leaves. In the future, an elderly Naveen hands over the isotope device to Raya at Rao Technology. It is revealed that the opening disaster was caused by the extremist group founded by Harold Nowak, which led to a devastating civil war. Raya's mission was to eliminate key figures in reverse chronological order to stop a bomb in 2024. The destroyed Philadelphia is shown again in reverse, signaling that the future has been corrected. The movie ends in 2015 as Thomas arrives at a hospital with flowers and witnesses Amy giving birth to Raya. At last, Thomas finds peace as he holds his granddaughter, the child destined to change the future. And with that, the timeline finally comes full circle. A future rewritten, a war prevented, and a grandfather holding the very child who once sacrificed herself to save millions. If you enjoyed this mind bending time travel thriller and want more deep cinematic movie recaps like this, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe to CineSnap for more stories where one decision can change the future.